Hey everybody, welcome to Q&A video number 60. Make sure to keep asking questions, doesn't matter if they're about. They can be about anything. Just know I don't respond to review requests or Let's Play requests in these videos, but I will respond to those in the comments. Once again, those are things like what do you think about insert game here. If you want to ask me about a specific feature of a certain game or something that is surrounding that game in the news, then feel free to ask that, but don't ask me about just my thoughts about insert game here because, again, that's a review request. Anyway, the gameplay in the background is of Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell, the original, because it actually ties in quite a lot with the first question on my list, which is from Grotnot. As someone who invests a ton of time per review, playing the game, writing the script, which I don't do, recording the review, editing, and uploading it, do you find finishing projects easy, and do you have any advice finishing bigger projects? Well, the majority of my time with any video game review is spent actually going through the game itself, unless it's a really short game, in which case it might actually take me longer to put together the review. Editing and recording the audio for the review usually takes about 2.5 to 3 hours or so, and then compiling the review takes anywhere from maybe 20 minutes all the way up to a couple of hours. Just depends on how long the video is and how high quality that video is. Now you may be wondering how that ties in with Splinter Cell. It's because the game is very slow, very methodical. It takes me quite a while to get through it, on top of the game actually just being kind of a slog to get through after having played Chaos Theory. So with regards to finishing the projects, I find that once I actually am able to get through the game itself, doing the review is easy. It's actually really easy, unless I'm just having issues that particular day with actually coming up with how to put my thoughts into words. But that doesn't happen all that often, luckily, so usually it's pretty smooth sailing once I've gone through the game. The trick is being able to get through the game. The other game that would be fantastic to show in the gameplay footage in relation to this question is Dark Souls. I'm about 9.5 hours into that thing and stuck on the bell gargoyles, and I've been stuck there for the past hour or so. It's hour, 2 hours, something like that, and it's driving me up the wall. In situations like that, where I'm just frustrated with the project in general and don't really have any real desire to go through it at any given point, makes it much more difficult to actually go through the thing. So that's what's really going to determine whether or not finishing the project is actually easy. It's whether or not I have any actual investment in the project. If I'm actually enjoying what I'm doing, then it's going to be a lot easier to go through it. If it's outright irritating me, like in the case of the Dark Souls review that I'm trying to do, it's going to take a lot longer and it's going to require a lot more effort. Now, as far as finishing bigger projects goes, really it just depends on what you're working on. I mean, if you have to do a lot of research, I recommend getting that out of the way as soon as possible. And if there's any new developments on whatever it is you're working on, then make sure you take a look at those and see if they're relevant to what you're working on. But other than that, it's a pretty straightforward process. You just need to get it done, and the more time you spend not doing it, the more irritating it's going to be when eventually you come down to the wire on it and you don't really have all that much that you're able to do about it. I mean, to give you an idea, the reviews that I make are often a week or two in advance, sometimes more than that depending on what it is. If it's like the case of the Command & Conquer reviews, some of those I had done at the beginning of August, but the more recent ones, the ones for CNC 3, Generals, Red Alert 3, and of course CNC 4, those were all done during the month of August, while the others were done at the beginning. Basically, they were done at the end of July. So what ended up happening with that was I gave myself room to actually work on things. So I recommend doing that. If you can get a few things done on a big project, that will leave you room to work on the others and make it a lot easier to work on the other things. Do that, because that will just be a huge load off your mind. But if you can't do that, well, do it all in one go if you can, and then just tweak it as you need to as you continue to the due date of the project. Or you could just wait until the absolute last minute and get it all done the night before it's due, and then it would be hilariously messed up, or it might be genius, depending on how well you work in that kind of environment. Some people just need a lot of stress to actually work really well, and that's a pretty big stressor. So do what works for you, but I ultimately have given my advice on the matter. Anyway, let's move on to a question from Dave Danton. Do you like films by Akira Kurosawa? If so, which ones do you really like? Well, I absolutely love Seven Samurai, and I also really enjoy Yojimbo. And the only other one I've seen all the way through is Throne of Blood, which is basically if you took Macbeth and translated it into a sort of Japanese context with a lot of very stylistic elements from Japanese no theater and everything. And I really did enjoy that as well, but I haven't seen any of his other works, including Sanjuro, which is one that I've actually really wanted to see for a while now. But I have not seen as much Akira Kurosawa as I would really like to see, unfortunately. Next question is from Noir Suede. With Mario Maker being a major hit, do you think other games would start including basic level makers like Halo's Forge or Doom 4's Snap Map to cash in on it? Well, that depends entirely on how much the developers want control over their own game, because once you start throwing those things out there, DLC becomes an issue. Because, let's face it, why would people bother buying the DLC when they can get tons of maps for free that may be just as good, if not better, than the paid DLC maps? More importantly, why would people bother with DLC when they can basically get copies of the DLC maps for free? That's another thing you have to worry about with this sort of thing. So once you make a level editing tool of some description, you're basically taking all control out of your own hands and throwing it at the feet of the players. And that is scary for a lot of people. Now, Bethesda and id Software in general have had very good histories with the mod community, so they're a lot less averse to allowing modders to just go nuts with their stuff. Whereas someone like, say, Microsoft has a harder time with it. And frankly, the fact that Forge mode is even a thing is pretty impressive. But apart from that, you do see other level editors being made in certain games. I know there was one for Far Cry 2. I don't remember if they made one for Far Cry 3 or not, but I don't think they did. And I couldn't see EA or Activision doing level editing tools for any of their games anymore because they're just control freaks. But you might start seeing more of that in the smaller publishers, in people who really just always go with the flow. If the editing features of these newer games are really, really popular, if they really do drive sales, then a lot of people are going to copy it, because that's what ends up happening with the gaming industry. Someone does something that's really big, and then everyone else is like, oh, we need to do that in order to actually be profitable, and so a lot of people do it, and then it gets run into the ground. So ultimately we'll just have to wait and see, but if the stuff in Mario Maker and Forge mode and Snap Map and all that actually do have very, very positive effects on the games, I can see it happening a bit more frequently. Next one is from Baba Snooker. What YouTube video game channels do you subscribe to and regularly watch? I've probably answered something like this before, but Total Biscuit does good stuff. I don't really agree with him all the time, but he's a good indicator at least of how good a PC port is, so there's that. And generally speaking, he's pretty good on various issues that are plaguing the gaming industry right now. I watch Razor Fist because he's entertaining, not necessarily because I agree with him on everything. In fact, I rarely agree with him on a lot of things. But at the same time, he's amusing as hell, so that's why I watch him. I also watch Angry Joe, but he's really in his element when a game is really bad, and he just goes berserk on it in a very amusing manner. But then he has things like his Risen reviews, in which case it's just like, nope, you have no idea what you're talking about. So I rarely agree with the guy, but I still watch him on occasion anyway. I watch Matthew Matosis when he actually does make a video, because he's very well thought out on his videos, and he presents some pretty compelling commentary. Noah Caldwell-Gervais also does this, and he does some really fantastic long-form stuff. But once again, it's more of a matter of when he actually produces videos as opposed to just kind of watching him regularly, because he doesn't really put out more than 1 or 2 videos a month. So that's kind of an issue with him. But other than that, as far as Let's Players go, Kakoskia, Necroscope, although more recently I haven't really had all that much time to watch Let's Plays, so I haven't really kept up with those guys, nor have I kept up with the other Let's Play channels that I do watch, for example, Forfeited Stories. But other than that, I do also watch the Jimquisition, specifically the Jimquisition, not his other stuff, even though occasionally he does put out something that's amusing. But that's kind of it right now. There are others that I'm subscribed to, but I don't watch them on a regular basis. Anyway, let's move on to the final question for this video, and this one's actually kind of heavy. It's from Cameron Crawford. What are your thoughts on depression and suicidal thoughts in Western society? Well, I think our mental health care system is outright terrible in the U.S. It's not quite as terrible in other countries in the West, but it's still pretty bad. And this in itself causes a lot of problems for people who do suffer from depression. So that's pretty problematic in and of itself. But then there's the issue of people who look at people who are depressed and they don't really understand what depression actually is. And they are like, oh, well, you just need to do things that make you feel happy. It's just not that simple. And it's kind of impossible to really describe to people how depression feels. Now, I admittedly have not been diagnosed with depression because I have never seen the need to actually go into a doctor to talk to them about this particular problem. But I do suffer from a chronic sense of apathy and a chronic sense of especially hating myself, but also hating a lot of things around me, just all of a sudden out of nowhere, and it drives me completely insane. So I admittedly am not coming from the standpoint of someone who actually suffers from depression, so I can't really tell you exactly how depression is going to feel, but I do know that it is something that absolutely plagues someone who suffers from it every single day, at every single moment. And I know that medicine helps, but it doesn't always really resolve the issue. So I've known plenty of people who have suffered from depression in their lives, and some people who have actually straight up attempted suicide. And chances are, if you live in Western society, you are going to run into someone who suffers from depression. It's an extremely common mental disorder in the West in particular. I don't know necessarily about other cultures, but it seems to be particularly problematic over here, where a mental disorder is generally seen as not only a weakness, but as, well, they're crazy, therefore avoid them, or something like that. When avoiding someone with these conditions is really just about the worst thing you can do. Now, it is admittedly rather hard to deal with people who actually have these conditions, and while there are some things you can do to be more sensitive to their problems, it's really just going to depend on an individual basis because everyone reacts to it differently. So I can't really give you the full-on definitive way of being sensitive to someone who does suffer from these conditions, but there are numerous resources out there that can sort of help you out in this regard, and it's just a major failing of our society that we don't look out for these people, especially when depression itself is so widely spread. I mean, again, chances are you're going to know someone who suffers from depression on a chronic basis, and it's not just a matter of, well, I'm depressed today and tomorrow I'll be fine, or something like that. I mean, speaking from experience, the episodes I go through are not full-on depression. They only last at most a couple of days, and usually only a few hours at most. So it's nothing compared to what people who suffer from depression actually have to deal with on a daily basis, every moment. So it's rough. And it also doesn't help that I'm not really a doctor. I can't really speak too much from the medical side of things. I don't really know as much about mental disorders as I probably should. And about the best advice I can give for you if you suffer from what may be depression is to seek medical help. And don't worry about what other people think. You're not crazy if you seek psychiatric help for any mental disorder. It doesn't matter what it is, whether it's depression, schizophrenia, you name it. You're not crazy for seeking help with those conditions. It's just an idiotic stigma that needs to go away. And I'm thinking that with the widespread issues with this particular problem, particularly with depression, but also with other mental illnesses, that it's going to be going away. We're dealing with a rather huge epidemic of people who suffer from depression, from other mental illnesses, and sooner rather than later, it's just going to change the way we think about it. It's just not something we can ignore anymore. And Western society has a historically terrible way of dealing with this sort of thing. Not to mention, American life in particular is so incredibly stressful, it certainly doesn't help the problem. If anything, it only makes the problem worse. So, I expect this sort of thing to get more and more widespread. I expect it to get worse before it gets better. But, as far as people who actually suffer from depression goes, please seek medical help if you haven't already. And if you know someone who suffers from it, or suffers from any other mental illness for that matter, educate yourself on the matter. Find out more about these particular illnesses. They need help, and even though they're hard to deal with sometimes, you need to be understanding, and you need to be sensitive to that problem, because it's not necessarily something they can help doing. Once again, I am not a doctor, so don't take my word over that of someone who actually knows what they're talking about when it comes to depression. These are just some things I've picked up over the years of dealing with people who have depression and having to just kind of learn by the seat of my pants, so to speak. So I do encourage you to look into more information about this sort of thing if you know someone who suffers from depression, and the same goes for any other mental illness for that matter, whether it's, again, schizophrenia or any number of other mental illnesses. Just remember, just because someone has a mental disorder does not mean they're crazy. It means they need help. And with that, that was Q&A 60. Make sure to keep asking questions. I will catch you guys in later videos.